The neon sign
Get your hands
outside
off
the Iron
me!
Piston didn't
Calm
flash.
down, you're making a
It
scene!
didn't flicker.
Please, stop this!
Let
Burned
go!
with a steady, low-red
Full
glow
throttle, no
that
stopping!
bled into
Feel
the
that
dark
fire!
California
Stay
night
tight,
like
brothers!
the locals
Get
in
to the
Barstow
car
didn't
now!
call
What
it a
is
barn.
that?
They
Go,
called it the
go!
last
Just-
place
I'm
before the
coming.
desert swallowed
Get
you
in!
whole. Everyone in the county knew the rules about that place. Keep your eyes forward. Don't stare at the patches. And under no circumstances do you touch the bikes lined up outside like a row of sleeping predators waiting to be woken. When the bartender position opened up, 4 people inquired. 3 of them drove past the parking lot, saw the row of Harley-Davidsons gleaming under the moon, and kept driving. The 4th was Sloan Merritt. She didn't take the job because she was fearless. She took it because she had run out of options, and the wolves inside that bar were at least wolves she could see. She didn't know it yet, but walking through those heavy oak doors was going to change everything. It was going to cost her almost everything too. But that is the nature of the only doors worth walking through. Sloan Merritt sat on the floor of her apartment in Barstow because the one chair she owned had a broken leg, and she had stopped bothering to fix it 3 months ago, around the same time she stopped bothering to hang the curtain rod, and 2 months after she stopped bothering to replace the light bulb in the kitchen. The overhead light in the living room still worked. She sat under it on the bare linoleum, back against the wall, a crumpled envelope in her hands. The eviction notice was from Apex Continental Property Management. 30 days. The language was clean and clinical and merciless, the way legal language always is when it wants to take something from you without having to look you in the eye while it does it. 30 days to vacate. As if 30 days was a gift. As if 30 days was enough time to solve a problem that had been building for 2 years. Sloan was 28 years old. She had 2/3 of a nursing degree. She couldn't afford to finish a 2011 Honda Accord with a slow leak in the rear left tire and $43 in her checking account. The apartment was a single bedroom in a complex on the eastern edge of Barstow, where the town gave up trying and let the desert take over. The carpet in the bedroom had a stain she hadn't made. The water heater groaned every morning at 5:15 like it was being tortured. The neighbor above her played the same 3 country songs on rotation every Friday night until 2 in the morning. She had learned to sleep through all of it. What she could not sleep through was the math. $34,000. That was the number Tanner Gould had left behind when he disappeared into the Nevada night 6 months ago. Not in one lump sum, not in some dramatic single act of destruction. He had done it quietly, methodically, the way a man who has been lying for a long time does things. A little from the savings account here, a little from the joint credit card there, a payday loan she didn't know about, then another, a gambling debt to a man in Laughlin whose associates did not send letters they sent people. Then Tanner was gone and the debt was not. Sloan had loved Tanner Gould the way young people love someone who makes them feel chosen. He had a smile that arrived slowly, like he was deciding to give it to you specifically. He called her smart in a way that made her feel seen rather than complimented. He remembered small things. He was charming in the particular way that only people with something to hide can sustain for long stretches of time. By the time she understood what was underneath the charm, the damage was already structural. She set the eviction notice down on the floor beside her and picked up her phone. The screen was cracked in the upper left corner, a spiderweb fracture she'd been ignoring for 4 months. She looked at the photo she kept as her wallpaper. Her sister Della, 24 years old, standing in front of a lake somewhere in the mountains, laughing at something off camera, her hair wet, her eyes clear and bright and alive. That photo was 8 months old. It was taken 3 weeks before Della's second relapse. Della was currently at Clearwater Recovery in Victorville, 42 miles away. She had been there for 61 days. She was doing well, genuinely well, the counselor said. She was showing up. She was doing the work. She needed 3 more months of residential treatment to complete the program. The program cost $4,200 a month. Sloan had paid the first 2 months by selling her television, her laptop, the good camera she'd bought herself after graduation, and by working double shifts at a diner on Route 58, where the owner paid her partially in cash and looked the other way about the payroll taxes. She had paid those 2 months, and then the diner had closed 2 weeks ago abruptly, a handwritten sign on the door that had said simply under new management reopening soon. She had not been called back. She picked up the eviction notice again and read the name at the top, Apex Continental Property Management. There was a phone number and a website and a corporate address in Phoenix, Arizona. She had called the number twice. Both times she had been told the situation was non-negotiable and that a payment plan was not available for accounts in arrears greater than 60 days. She scrolled through the local job listings on her cracked phone screen. She had been doing this for 11 days. She had applied for 6 positions. 2 had not responded. 2 had offered part-time hours at minimum wage, which after taxes would not cover the rent gap, let alone the gap between the rent gap and everything else. 1 had called her back, asked her 2 questions, and then gone quiet when she mentioned she was available immediately, as if availability was suspicious. The 4th listing was the one she kept scrolling past and then scrolling back to. It had been posted and reposted every day for 3 weeks. The repetition alone told a story. Bartender needed, night shift, cash pay, thick skin required. Ask for Rex at the Iron Piston. No prior convictions checked. No references required. Sloan stared at the listing for a long time. Everyone in Barstow knew what the Iron Piston was. It sat on a stretch of industrial road on the western outskirts of town, a squat cinder block building painted matte black, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The parking lot was gravel. The windows were painted over from the inside. It was the bar, the meeting place, and the unofficial headquarters of the local chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The rumors were not rumors so much as local history. The stories were told at dinner tables and in barbershops and in the way people's voices dropped automatically when the building came up in conversation. Sloan put her phone down. She looked at the photo of Della. She thought about what it would mean for Della if she came home and there was no home to come home to. She thought about Della standing outside Clearwater Recovery with a duffel bag and 61 days of hard work and nowhere to go, and what that looked like statistically, what it looked like in terms of outcomes, what it meant for a 24-year-old woman who had finally, for the first time in years, started to come back to herself. She picked up her phone and wrote down the address. Thick skin, she said to the empty apartment. She had been building it for 2 years. She figured she had enough. The drive out to the Iron Piston took 18 minutes. The streetlights thinned out after the first mile and then disappeared, entirely replaced by the flat dark of the high desert and the cold white light of a 3/4 moon. Sloan drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. She had learned in the last 6 months that silence was easier to think in than noise. Noise let you pretend you weren't thinking about what you were thinking about. She pulled into the gravel lot at 10 minutes past 9. There were 14 motorcycles lined up along the front of the building in a row so clean and precise it looked arranged rather than parked. Harleys, all of them ranging from older Road Kings, worn to a working finish, to a newer Street Glide that caught the moonlight on its chrome like a mirror. Her Honda Accord looked faintly absurd next to them, like a paper cup at a table set with crystal. She sat in the car for 30 seconds. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles under her eyes she had stopped trying to conceal 2 weeks ago. Hair pulled back tight. The leather jacket she'd bought at a thrift store in Victorville 3 years ago, the one that smelled faintly of somebody else's cigarettes, the one she wore because it was the warmest thing she owned and because something about the weight of it felt like armor, even when she knew armor was a metaphor, and metaphors didn't stop anything real. She did not look soft. She had not looked soft in a long time. She hoped that was enough. She got out of the car. The gravel was loud under her boots. The night air was cold and smelled of dust and motor oil and something metallic she couldn't quite name. As she crossed the lot toward the front entrance, the heavy wooden door swung open from the inside, and a man filled the doorframe so completely that for a moment it looked like the building had grown a person in the shape of a wall. He was enormous, 6'4" at minimum, with shoulders that suggested someone had decided the original design wasn't quite wide enough and made structural adjustments. He wore a leather cut with the club's Death's Head patch centered on the back, and tattoos ran up both arms and up his neck and disappeared into a beard that reached his collarbone. He wore dark sunglasses despite the hour. He stood there and he looked at her, and he did not say a word. Sloan stopped. She looked up at him. The distance between them was about 6 feet and felt like considerably less. "I'm here to see Rex," she said. Her voice came out even. She was genuinely surprised by that. The man looked at her for what felt like a very long time. Then he shifted his weight slightly to the left, creating a gap between himself and the doorframe. "Kitchen entrance," he said. His voice sounded like gravel being turned in a cement mixer. Around back. Don't touch the bikes. I wasn't planning to, Sloane said. She walked around the building. The gravel announced every step. She felt the eyes. She couldn't see the watching that happens in places where watching is a professional habit. She found the steel door marked deliveries on the back wall and knocked twice. The door opened immediately as if someone had been standing on the other side of it, waiting. A wave of cigarette smoke and warm air moved over her. The man in the doorway was older, somewhere in his late 50s, with silver hair pushed straight back from his forehead and a face that had been lived in hard and thoroughly. His jaw was set in a way that suggested it had been set that way for a longer time and had no intention of changing. He wore a white t-shirt and his leather cut, and the patches on the cut told the story of a man who had been in this world for decades and had risen to the top of it without losing the quality of someone who still knew how to do the physical work. His eyes were the color of weathered slate. They moved over her with the quality of assessment rather than interest. Not a man sizing up a woman, a commanding officer sizing up someone who had shown up at his perimeter without being invited. "I'm here about the bartending job," Sloane said. He raised one eyebrow by a fraction of an inch. "You lost." "No, I read the listing. 3 times. I know where I am." He took a slow drag from the cigarette in his right hand. Let the smoke out without looking away from her. "What's your name?" "Sloane Merritt." "I'm Rex." He said it the way men say their name when it is both introduction and declaration. "You know what this place is, Sloane." "I know what it is." "And you're still standing here." "I'm still standing here." Rex looked at her for another few seconds. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, but the absence of the dismissal she had been bracing for. He stepped back and held the door open. "Come in. You faint, you're fired. You steal, you're dead. You survive the night, we talk about pay." Sloane stepped over the threshold. The door closed behind her with the solid final sound of something that meant what it was doing. The interior of the iron piston was darker than the outside, which was already dark. The light came from pool table lamps and the red and amber glow of neon beer signs mounted on walls that had absorbed decades of cigarette smoke and were now a color that defied easy naming. The bar itself was a long slab of polished oak that ran the length of the left wall, its surface worn smooth in patterns that marked where elbows had rested for years. Behind it, bottles were arranged with a precision that suggested someone cared about order even here, or maybe especially here. There were roughly 20 men in the room, some at the bar, some at tables, some around the 2 pool tables at the far end. The conversation had a low layered quality, the sound of people talking, who were also always listening. When Sloane came in through the kitchen and took her position behind the bar, the room noticed. Not all at once. It moved through the space like a current, a gradual turning of attention, a settling of new awareness. The conversations didn't stop. They just changed frequency. Rex moved to a corner table with awe ceremony and opened what looked like a ledger. He did not look up again. He had placed her behind the bar. The rest was up to her. Sloane took stock. She had tended bar before 2 years at a place downtown before it changed ownership one summer at a resort outside San Bernardino. She knew the mechanics. She knew how to read a room. She found the tap handles, checked the well bottles, located the glass washer. The back bar was stickier than she would have liked and smelled of spilled beer that had dried and been poured over again many times, but it was organized and the stock was good. She served the first 3 customers without incident. Beer bourbon, neat vodka soda. Prices were on a laminated card taped inside the cabinet below the register. Cash only. She made change from a metal box and kept the bills organized facing the same direction the way she'd been trained to do years ago. It was the 4th customer who made his move. He came off the bar stool nearest the taps and planted himself in front of her with the deliberate energy of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. He was lean and wiry with a shaved head and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow at an angle, giving his face a permanent expression of interrupted surprise. His leather cut had a bottom rocker that said California and a name patch above the left chest pocket that read Cutter. He had the particular restless quality of a man whose hands were never completely still, fingers always working some private rhythm on whatever surface was nearest. He looked at her with the bright, assessing eyes of someone who had spent years testing these people to find out what they were made of and had developed an efficient method for doing it. "Jack and Coke," he said. "Heavy on the Jack, light on everything else." Sloane poured the drink. She set it down in front of him. $8. Cutter looked at the glass. He looked at her. He reached into his cut with 2 fingers and produced a $5 bill, which he set on the bar with the slow deliberateness of a man making a point. That's what I got. The room's ambient noise lowered slightly, not enough that you'd notice unless you were paying attention, and Sloane was paying attention. She looked at the $5 bill. She looked at Cutter. She did not reach for it. "Drink's $8, she said. "I can pour you something that costs 5, or you can go find 3 more. Cutter leaned forward, putting his forearms on the bar and closing the distance between them. He was close enough that she could smell the cigarettes and the particular leather and road smell of someone who'd spent most of their time on a motorcycle. "You know who I am, new girl. Your patch says Cutter. The bar says $8. Sloane kept her voice level and her eyes on his. "Those are the 2 facts I'm working with right now." The room had gone very quiet. Not silent, not theatrical, but the specific quiet of people choosing to listen without looking like they're listening. Cutter stared at her for a long 3 seconds. His fingers had stopped their tapping. Then he leaned back slowly. He reached into his cut again and put $3 more on the bar. "There's your 8. Sloane took the money. She made change for the extra and set it on the bar without comment. Cutter looked at the coins, then looked at her, and something in his expression shifted from testing to something closer to actual attention. "You got a mouth on you," he said. "I've got bills to pay," Sloane said. "Same thing." From the corner table, Rex did not look up from his ledger, but the corner of his mouth moved in a direction that was not exactly a smile and was not exactly not one either. Cutter took his drink, considered her for another moment, then went back to his stool. He said something under his breath to the man next to him. The man laughed. The room's ambient noise returned to its normal register. Sloane exhaled through her nose. She turned back to her work. She survived the next 4 hours by keeping her hands busy and her head clear. These men drank with a focused, professional quality, not the sloppy, recreational drinking of happy hour crowds, but the steady, purposeful consumption of people for whom the bar was an extension of home. They were not rowdy. They were not crude to her in any way she had not been prepared for. They watched her the way people watch something new in a familiar space, calibrating, deciding. She worked fast, and she worked clean, and she did not overpour, and she did not underpour, and she called the prices exactly as posted, and she gave correct change every time. She learned the hierarchy the way you learn any ecosystem, by watching what deferred to what. The prospects were easy to identify. They were younger, they moved differently, with the particular kinetic alertness of people who were always anticipating being needed or corrected. They fetched ice-swept broken glass and existed at the bottom of a structure with clearly understood gradations. The full patch members sat at tables and at the bar with the comfortable authority of people who had earned their particular piece of territory. The officers occupied a different register entirely. Rex she had identified before she walked through the kitchen door. His patch confirmed it, but his authority preceded his patch. It was not performed. It was simply present the way gravity is present. When he spoke, which was not often, the room rearranged itself around the content of what he said. There was another man she watched. He was at a table near the back wall, lean in a different way than Cutter's lean, which was wiry and kinetic. This man's leanness was composed, deliberate. He had dark hair going to gray at the temples, and a face that was handsome in the way that things worn down to their essential components can be handsome. His leather cut bore a patch that read Vice President. His name patch read Dex. He watched Sloane the way Rex watched her, with assessment, but where Rex's assessment was impersonal, efficient, the look of a man deciding whether something was useful, Dex's had a different quality. He was calculating something she couldn't fully read. He smiled at the right moments, laughed at the right moments, held his drink without draining it. He was performing normalcy well enough to fool most people. Sloane noticed it the way people with a fine-tuned sense of threat notice the thing that is slightly off. She could not have articulated why. She filed it away and kept moving. Around midnight, a woman emerged from the back hallway and settled onto a stool at the kitchen end of the bar. She was in her mid-50s, compact and upright, with silver-streaked hair pinned back in the particular stillnesses of someone who had been in difficult rooms for many years and had long since stopped being unsettled by them. She wore an apron over a flannel shirt. She set her forearms on the bar and looked at Sloane with dark, interested eyes. "You're still standing," the woman said. So far, Sloan said. I'm Opal. I was married to the man who built this place. That was before your time. She said it without sentiment. Rex runs it now. I run the kitchen and I run everything that matters. I'm Sloan. I know your name. Opal looked at her with a directness that was not unkind. You want coffee? Sloan did want coffee. She had wanted coffee for the last 2 hours. Yes, please. Opal went and came back with 2 cups. She set one on Sloan's side of the bar. They drank in a companionable silence for a moment. Opal did not ask why she was there or what she was running from or what she needed. Sloan would learn over the weeks that followed that Opal already knew most of what she needed to know about people before she asked them anything. She had been watching long enough to have learned how to read what was not said. The hours moved. The crowd thinned. By 2 in the morning, the room held 12 people. By 2:38, the big man from the front door, whose name had resolved over the course of the evening to Brick, settled onto a stool at the far end of the bar and said nothing to anyone and drank water and watched the room with the passive, comprehensive attention of a security system with a pulse. It was at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning that the front door opened. 3 men came in who were not what the room contained. Sloan knew it before she consciously processed the specific details. It was the quality of the wrongness, first the way a room knows when something has entered it that is not calibrated to the room's frequency. Then the details arrived: cheap suits that were trying to be something the fabric couldn't support. Shoes that were polished, but the wrong kind of polished and aggressive rather than cared for. A physical arrangement, the way they moved into the room, that communicated not casual entrance, but tactical deployment. The music didn't stop, but the quality of attention in the room changed like a pressure shift before weather. The man in front was the one who led. He was somewhere in his 40s with a complexion that suggested he spent a lot of time inside doing things that felt important, and flat gray eyes that moved over the room with a specific professional quality. He looked at Sloan the way people look at you when they have been looking for you and have now found you, and the looking is the easy part. He walked to the bar and stopped in front of her and did not bother with the pretense of wanting a drink. We're looking for Tanner Gould, he said. His voice was flat and transactional. We believe you know where he is. Sloan kept her hand still on the bar. I don't know where he is. You were married to him. We're divorced. Common law, actually. California doesn't always make that distinction clean. He said it like he'd looked it up, like he'd looked a lot of things up about her specifically. When did you last speak to him? 6 months ago, when he left. The man's flat gray eyes held hers. He owes people money, Sloan, not just money. He knows things he shouldn't know, and he took something that wasn't his to take. You understand what I'm telling you? I understand that you came into a place where you are not welcome to ask me questions I've already answered. The man looked at her for a moment, then he reached across the bar and closed his fingers around her wrist. He did not get to close them. Brick was off his stool before the contact was complete. He moved with a speed that was genuinely alarming, given his mass, and his hand came down on the man's shoulder with a grip that made the man's face rearrange itself into an expression of involuntary pain. You touched the staff. Brick said, his voice the same gravel and cement sound as before, but quieter now, which was somehow worse. You lose the hand. Rex was already out of his corner. He hadn't hurried. He didn't need to. The room had rearranged itself around him by the time he reached the bar, 8 men on their feet without instruction. Pool cues resting in hands that were not playing pool anymore. Rex stood in front of the lead man. He was roughly the same height. He looked at the man the way someone looks at a problem that is not complicated, only tedious. You see a collection agency sign on the door, Rex asked. This is a private matter. Everything in this building is private. Rex's voice had the particular quietness of genuine authority, the kind that does not need volume, because volume is for people who are not sure they'll be heard. That woman is an employee of mine. She's under my roof. Under my roof, nobody touches her unless I say. You have a problem with Tanner Gould. You find Tanner Gould. You come back in here and put your hands on my people again, and you won't walk back to your car. The lead man looked at the room. He looked at Cutter, who had a Bowie knife out, turning it idly in the light, not threatening, just present. He looked at Brick's hand still on his shoulder. He looked at Rex and understood with the clarity that survival instinct provides when survival instinct is still functional, that whatever calculation he had made about this errand had used bad numbers. The debt stands, he said. He said it to Sloan, not to Rex. It was the only power he had left, and he used it. Get out, Rex said. The three men left. The door closed. The room's energy changed key, not relief exactly, but the release of a particular kind of held attention. Sloan realized her hands were shaking. Not visibly, she had held them flat on the bar, but internally a trembling along the bones of her forearms. She focused on the sensation and let it be what it was without letting it become anything more. Rex came to the bar. He sat on the stool that Cutter had occupied earlier in the evening. Tell me about Tanner Gould, he said. Sloan looked at him. He was my husband. He gambled. He borrowed from people who weren't banks. He left 6 months ago and took nothing with him except the problems which he left. What did he take that he shouldn't have taken? I don't know, Sloan said. And that was the truth then. She didn't know yet. Rex looked at her steadily. Those men weren't ordinary debt collectors. I know. You're not going to stop being a problem for me just because the night is over. Sloan looked at him directly. I need this job, Rex. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. My sister is in a recovery program in Victorville, and I'm the only person paying for it, and if I walk out of here tonight without work, I don't know what happens to her. That's the whole truth of why I'm here. If that's a problem you can't carry, I understand. But I'll work harder than anyone you've had behind that bar, and I won't bring anything into this building that I know about. Rex was quiet for a moment. He looked at the bar's surface. He looked at the door through which the men had left. He looked back at her. Come back tomorrow at 8, he said. Shift starts at 9. I'll have the cash rate ready. Sloan untied her apron. She folded it and set it on the bar. I'll be here. She went through the kitchen and out the back door and crossed the gravel lot to her Honda. She sat in the driver's seat with her hands in her lap for a full minute before she started the engine. The night was very quiet. The moon had moved west. The row of Harleys along the front of the building were still and chrome bright and faintly menacing in the way that beautiful, powerful things are always faintly menacing at rest. She took out her phone and called Della. It rang 3 times. Della had a phone allowed on weekends only, but Sloan knew the night staff sometimes let it slide on weekday evenings for family calls. On the 4th ring, Della picked up. Sloan, it's late. Are you okay? I'm okay. Sloan looked at the building. I got the job. The bartending thing, the one you were nervous about. I wasn't nervous, Sloan said, which was not exactly true. It went fine. Where is it? Sloan considered this. It's a bar on the west side of town. It's fine, Della. The people are fine. A small pause. Okay, Della said with the particular gentleness of someone who has learned to accept the limits of what they're going to be told. Okay, thank you, Sloan. Get some sleep. I'll call you this weekend. She hung up. She started the car. She pulled out of the gravel lot and onto the empty industrial road and drove back toward town, the red glow of the Iron Pistons neon signs shrinking in her rearview mirror and then disappearing entirely as she rounded the curve. She had $300 in cash in her jacket pocket. It was the most money she'd had in 2 months. It was not enough to solve anything permanently. It was enough to call Clearwater Recovery tomorrow morning and tell them the account would be current by the end of the week. For the first time in 6 months, Sloan Merritt drove home without looking in the rearview mirror for a car that was following her. For the first time in 6 months, there was nothing there to see. That would not last. She knew with the deep, tired certainty of a person who has learned to read the weather by the quality of the air that the man with the flat gray eyes had not been delivering a message. He had been delivering a preview. The debt stands, he had said. He had said it to her and not to Rex because he wanted her to know that the room full of Hell's Angels between them was a complication, not an ending. But tonight, for the length of this drive home, she let the relief be what it was. She let herself feel the strange, unfamiliar warmth of having been defended by people who did not know her and owed her nothing. She thought about what Rex had said under my roof, nobody touches her. She thought about the way he had said it, not as a performance, not as theater, but as a statement of policy, the kind of policy that had been in place long before she arrived and would be in place long after. Sloan Merritt had been building her thick skin for 2 years. Walking into the Iron Piston on a cold California night with $43 in her account and her sister's future riding on whatever decision she made, she had not found safety. She was not naive enough to think that, but she had found something she had not expected to find in a building that looked like a fortress and smelled like motor oil and cigarettes and old beer. She had found people who understood the first and most important principle of survival, that when something threatens one of yours, you stand up. She had not been one of theirs for more than a few hours. She had not earned anything yet. She had survived an evening and gotten the bomb and been defended by people who barely knew her name. But Della needed 3 more months of treatment. The rent was 30 days past due. The man with the flat gray eyes would be back. Sloan pressed the accelerator and drove through the dark desert toward Barstow, toward the broken-legged chair and the absent curtain rod and the bare linoleum floor, toward everything that still needed to be solved. She was, for the first time in a long time, ready to solve it. 2 weeks settled into the iron piston, the way Sloan herself had settled into it, not smoothly, not without friction, but with a kind of stubborn permanence that surprised everyone involved, including Sloan. She learned the rhythms of the place, the way you learn the rhythms of any living thing, by paying attention and making mistakes and paying attention to the mistakes. She learned that Rex arrived every evening at 7:15, regardless of what the night held, and left last, regardless of how long the night ran. She learned that Brick communicated primarily through body language, and that his body language was surprisingly nuanced once you understood the vocabulary. She learned that Cutter's chaos was mostly performance, and that underneath it was a man of reliable instincts who had simply decided long ago that reliability was more interesting when wrapped in unpredictability. She learned that Opal knew everything about everyone in that building and volunteered nothing that hadn't been asked for, which meant that Opal's silence about any given subject was itself a form of information. She learned that Dex Harlan smiled at the right moments. She could not stop noticing that. The timing of it precise without being mechanical, warm without being genuine. She had known a man who smiled like that. She had been married to him. She said nothing about it to anyone and filed it away in the part of her mind where she kept things that hadn't yet resolved into something she could act on. The work itself was straightforward and physical, and left her tired in a way she preferred to the other kind of tired, the kind that came from worry rather than labor. She was fast behind the bar, and she was accurate with money, and she did not talk more than was useful. The members of the chapter had accepted her the way a body accepts a foreign element that has proven it won't cause infection, not with warmth exactly, but with the absence of rejection, which in this particular ecosystem was its own category of welcome. She called Della every Saturday morning. Della sounded better each time, clearer, more present. She was sleeping through the night now, which the counselors said was significant. She had started the art therapy program. She had made a friend, a woman named Portia, who was funny and blunt and made Della laugh in a way Sloan could hear through the phone, even when she was trying to be quiet about it. Sloan paid the rent on the 15th. She paid Clearwater Recovery on the 18th. She bought groceries that were not the cheapest available option for the first time in 3 months. She fixed the chair leg. She bought a new light bulb for the kitchen. Small things, solid things. The kind of things that don't change the shape of your life, but remind you that the shape of your life is not fixed. On the 16th day, Rook came through the back door bleeding. It was a Tuesday, typically the slowest night of the week, the bar holding maybe 12 people, the atmosphere low and functional. Sloan was restocking the well when she heard the back door bang open with a violence that was different from the ordinary violence of that door, which was heavy and required effort and was frequently treated with impatience. This was the sound of a door being hit by someone who was using their body rather than their hands. She looked up. Brick and Cutter came through the kitchen doorway, half carrying, half dragging a young man between them. She recognized him from the past 2 weeks. One of the prospects, a kid of maybe 22, with an open, unguarded face that looked too young for the cut he was wearing. His name patch said Rook. He was pale in the specific way that people go pale when their body is redirecting blood towards something urgent, and his hands were pressed against his left side, just above the hip, and the white of his t-shirt below those hands was no longer white. "Clear the tables," Rex said from behind her. He was already on his feet. She hadn't seen him move. The handful of regular patrons moved to the walls. Cutter swept the nearest pool table with one-in-arm bottles and glasses going to the floor in a cascade of breaking sound. They lifted Rook onto the green felt. His breathing was audible, ragged, working too hard. "Ricochet," Brick said, pressing his hands over Rook's. "Off a dumpster down by the rail yard. Some crew trying to strip a bike." He walked into the middle of it. "Call the doc," Rex said. "Doc's in Reno until Thursday." This from Dex, who had appeared from the back hallway and was now standing at the edge of the pool table with his arms crossed and his face arranged in the particular expression of a man running calculations. We take him to the ER, Rex. No hospitals. Rook's voice was thin and effortful. His eyes found Rex's face and held them. Please, the federal warrant. They run my name, I'm done. I'll be okay. I just need it stopped. Rex looked at the wound. He looked at Brick, who gave the smallest shake of his head. He looked at the door. Sloan watched his face move through the architecture of the decision, the life of his prospect on one side, the operational security of the club on the other, the absolute prohibition against bringing law enforcement into contact with the chapter on any terms at any time for any reason. I can help. She said it before she had consciously decided to say it. The room turned. Every face in it. Rex, Brick, uttered Dex. The men standing along the walls oriented toward her with the specific attention of people hearing something unexpected in a place where the unexpected is usually bad. Dex's expression shifted. You stick to the taps, he said. His voice was even, almost gentle. This isn't your concern. Sloan came out from behind the bar. She crossed the room to the pool table and set down the glass she was holding. She looked at the wound without touching it yet reading it. A jagged tear in the skin above Rook's left hip, the flesh around it already darkening the bleeding steady rather than arterial, which was good, but the object still present, which was not. She had worked 2 years of ER rotation at a hospital in San Bernardino before Tanner had finished gambling away her tuition. She had seen worse than this, though worse was not the standard she was applying right now. The standard she was applying was whether she could manage it. There's something still in there, she said. Metal fragment looks like. Oblique muscle, not deep. He's not going to bleed out, but it needs to come out, and the wound needs to be closed. She looked at Rex. I need the first aid kit, the real one I put under the register 2 weeks ago. Everclear from the top shelf, a lighter. And I need whoever is closest to him to hold him still. Rex looked at her for 3 full seconds. The room held its breath around that look. Then he nodded once. Mike. Brick moved without a word. Cutter was already at the bar getting the Everclear. Sloan went for the first aid kit herself, pulled it from under the register, where she had restocked it on her first paycheck, replacing the inadequate collection of bandages and expired antiseptics she'd found there with gauze, medical tape, suture thread, a needle kit sealed in plastic tweezers, and 2 pairs of latex gloves. She snapped the gloves on. She set her materials on the edge of the pool table. She looked at Rook, whose eyes were on her with the particular expression of someone deciding whether to trust the only available option. What's your name? She asked him. Not because she didn't know it, because fear responds to being addressed directly. Rook, he said. Actual name's Callum. Callum, I need you to hold as still as you can. This is going to hurt before it helps. Do you understand? He nodded. Brick placed his hands on Rook's shoulders. Cutter positioned himself at the kid's legs. Sloan poured Everclear directly into the wound. Rook arched off the pool table with a sound that was more animal than human, his back lifting, his hands scrabbling at the felt. Brick and Cutter held him. Sloan waited 3 seconds for the worst of it to pass, then picked up the tweezers. The room was silent in a way it had not been since she'd arrived. Not the silence of discomfort, the silence of people watching something that commanded their complete and undivided attention. She felt it at the edge of her awareness and let it stay there peripheral, and gave the rest of her attention to the work in front of her. The fragment was a piece of metal roughly the size of a thumbnail, irregular at the edges, seated at an angle in the oblique muscle. She worked the tweezers in with steady pressure, found purchase, and extracted it cleanly in a single movement. She held it up briefly, confirmed it was whole, and set it on the table. She repacked the wound with gauze, applied pressure for 90 seconds by the clock on the wall, and then threaded the suture needle with the economical efficiency of someone who had done this under worse conditions and worse lighting and more noise. She stitched the wound closed with 8 neat sutures, each one tight and evenly spaced. She dressed it with gauze and medical tape. She stripped the gloves. He needs oral antibiotics starting tomorrow, she said. Amoxicillin if you can get it, anything broad spectrum if you can't. Fluids rest no physical exertion for 72 hours. The sutures can come out in 10 days. She paused. He'll be fine. She looked up. The room was looking at her. Not the way it had looked at her on the first night, not with the predatory, calibrating quality of people deciding whether something was a threat or a test. This was different. This was the look of people who had just seen something they had not expected and were now adjusting their internal accounting. Rex walked to the pool table. He looked at the sutures with the careful attention of a man who knew enough about field wounds to evaluate the quality of work. He looked at Rook, whose color was already better, whose breathing had settled, whose face had moved out of the white territory of shock and back towards something recognizable. "Good work," Rex said. He turned. He looked at Sloane. He held that look for a moment. Then he turned to Dex. "She stays." Dex said nothing. He looked at Sloane, then at Rex, then at the wound, then back at Sloane. His expression was composed and unreadable, and entirely without the approval it would have needed to mean something other than what Sloane had been quietly cataloging for 2 weeks. He took out a cigarette, lit it, and walked toward the back hallway without a word. The silence he left behind was louder than anything he could have said. Later, when the bar had thinned to half a dozen people, and Rook had been moved to a back room to rest and the pool table had been cleaned and reset, Rex sat down on the bar stool across from Sloane. He had a beer he wasn't drinking, just holding the way people hold things when they need something to do with their hands while they think. "Why didn't you finish?" he said. Sloane looked at him. "The nursing degree," Rex said. She was quiet for a moment. She had been asked this question before in the careful tones of people who wanted to understand without intruding, and she had learned to answer it in the way that closed the conversation efficiently without giving away anything that mattered. She found looking at Rex Calloway on this particular stool, in this particular bar, on this particular night, that she did not want to close the conversation. "Tanner," she said, "he gambled the tuition money first. He told me it was a short-term thing, that he'd cover the next semester from a business deal that was about to come through. I believed him because I wanted to and because he was good at being believed. Then the rent money, then the car payment. By the time I understood the pattern well enough to name it, I was working 3 jobs to keep the lights on, and I hadn't been in a classroom in 8 months." She set the glass she was wiping down on the bar. "School became a thing that happened to a version of me that no longer existed." Rex turned his beer in his hands. "He gambled your actual future. He gambled everything that wasn't nailed down, and some things that were. The men who came in last week," Rex said, "the collectors, they're not going to stop coming." "I know. They're not ordinary debt collectors." "I know that too." Rex looked at her steadily. "What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing I know yet," Sloane said. "I only know what Tanner left me with. I don't know yet what he actually did." Rex considered this. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man who is accepting an answer as genuinely incomplete rather than strategically incomplete, and filing the distinction. "When you know more, you tell me." "I will." He picked up his beer, finally drank from it, set it down. "Neither are we," he said. "Done with this, whatever it becomes." It was not a reassurance. It was a statement of fact in the way that only things said by people who mean them precisely can be. Sloane heard it for what it was. She turned back to the bar and finished restocking the well bottles and did not say anything more about it. She drove home at 4 in the morning. She was almost at her apartment when she noticed the car parked across the street, a dark sedan with no identifying markings engine off no visible occupant. It had not been there when she left for work at 8. She drove past it without slowing and parked around the corner and went in through the back entrance of her building. She lay on her bed without sleeping for an hour. Then she got up and sat at the kitchen table and thought about Tanner. She thought about who Tanner Gould actually was beneath the slow smile and the specific attentiveness and the way he made you feel chosen. She thought about his habits, his patterns, his methods. She thought about what kind of person takes money from the people who need it most and replaces it with debt. She thought about what kind of person disappears in the night rather than face what he has done. She thought about the words the collector had used. He took something that wasn't his to take. She thought about Tanner's particular brand of recklessness, which had never been random, which had always been in service of something, some need or compulsion that she had never fully understood because he had never led her close enough to the real thing to understand it. She thought about these things until the sun came up over the desert and turned the kitchen window the color of a bruise going yellow at the edges, and then she made coffee and went to work. The envelope arrived on the 16th day. Sloan was in the back office at 4 in the afternoon, sorting the mail the way Rex had asked her to do twice-a-week bills and circulars, and the occasional official-looking envelope that Rex dealt with through channels she didn't ask about. The office was small and smelled of old paper and cigarette smoke, embedded so deeply in the walls that no amount of ventilation would ever fully reach it. There was a metal desk, a filing cabinet, a computer that was 3 hardware generations behind the current standard, and a corkboard with phone numbers written directly on the cork rather than on paper, which suggested permanence of a particular kind. She almost didn't see it. It was a padded envelope, standard brown, placed at the bottom of the pile beneath 3 utility bills and a circular for a restaurant supply company. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she had not seen in 6 months and would have recognized across a crowded room. Sloan Merritt, care of the Iron Piston. No return address, a Las Vegas postmark 11 days old. Her hands were very still as she opened it. Inside was a USB drive, black plastic casing, no markings, the kind available at any office supply store, and a folded index card. She opened the card. 4 words in Tanner's handwriting, the letters slightly uneven, which happened when he was frightened. "I'm sorry. Don't trust anyone." Sloan sat in the office chair for 30 seconds with the card in her hand. She felt the feelings in the order. They arrived: a cold shock of recognition, then a surge of something hot and complicated that was part fury and part the residue of grief for a version of Tanner that had never been real, then the cold clarity that came after both, the functional clarity of a person who has learned that feelings are information, and information is what you act on. She plugged the drive into the office computer. It asked for a password. She tried his birthday. Nothing. Her birthday. Nothing. The name of the money they'd had for 8 months before he lost the security deposit on their first apartment, gambling, and they'd had to give the dog to a neighbor. Nothing. The name of the street he'd grown up on in Fontana. Nothing. She sat back. She thought about Tanner Gould, who had been careless about most things and careful about exactly one, the things he valued. She thought about what he valued. She thought about what he would have used as a password for something he needed to access regularly but needed to protect. She typed in the date of their wedding. Access granted. The folder that opened contained 3 items: a spreadsheet, a folder of scanned documents, and a folder of photographs. The spreadsheet opened first. It was dense rows and rows of figures, dates, account numbers, and, in the far right column, names. At the top of the spreadsheet, centered, was a logo she recognized with the specific, unpleasant recognition of something you have tried to forget: Apex Continental Property Management. Sloan looked at the logo for a moment. The company that was evicting her from her apartment. The company whose collectors had come into the Iron Piston 2 weeks ago and put their hand on her wrist. She looked at the spreadsheet and began to read. It was not a rent roll. It was not a record of property transactions. It was a ledger, and what it was ledgering was not the kind of activity that appears in annual reports. She opened the document folder. Scanned bank records. Wire transfer confirmations. Email chains, the language of which was carefully indirect in the way that language used to discuss illegal activity by people who know they are creating a paper trail, is always indirect, full of references to consultants and service fees and project completions that map to nothing in any legitimate business operation she could identify. She cross-referenced names with dates. The picture that emerged was clear and large and deeply unpleasant. Tanner Gould had not merely borrowed money from the wrong people. He had been working for them, and he had been the bookkeeper for Apex Continental for 14 months, a contract position, cash compensation entirely off the books. He had access to the complete financial record of the organization's less visible operations. And at some point, for reasons she could only speculate about, he had made a copy of those records and run. The photograph folder was last. She opened it and found what she had been building toward without knowing it. The images were taken with a telephoto lens, slightly grainy but clear enough. A restaurant private dining room, the kind of place with no visible signage, and a reservation list that required a specific kind of phone call to access. 2 men at a table, drinks between them. The relaxed, unguarded body language of people who have known each other long enough to have stopped performing. One of the men she didn't recognize. 50s, well-dressed in the specific way of people with institutional money rather than new money, broad through the shoulders, a face that suggested he had gotten where he was by a combination of intelligence and the willingness to do things that intelligence alone would have counseled against. The other man she did recognize, though it took her a moment, context being the way it redirects recognition. He was in civilian clothes rather than the uniform she had seen him in on the news and on the billboard on Route 58 that said keeping Kern County safe in letters large enough to read at highway speed. He looked comfortable. He looked at home. He looked like a man having dinner with a business associate. Sheriff Dale Harkin, 22-year law enforcement veteran, 3-term elected official, the most powerful law enforcement figure in Kern County, California. Sloan opened the corresponding financial record and found the confirmation of what the photographs implied. 18 months of payments, $10,000 per month, from an Apex Continental subsidiary account to a numbered account that the document trail connected through 2 intermediary steps to a personal holding entity registered in the name of a family member of Sheriff Dale Harkin. And then she found the operational correlation. She went back to the spreadsheet and matched payment dates to a folder of news clippings Tanner had included printed out and scanned from the Kern County Recorder and the Barstow Desert Dispatch. Every payment corresponded within a week to a significant law enforcement action in the county: a drug seizure, a raid on a distribution operation, an arrest of individuals connected to a competing criminal enterprise. The pattern was not ambiguous once you saw it. Harkin was not a corrupt official in the ordinary sense, someone taking money to look away. He was an active instrument. He was using the resources of his office to eliminate competition for the organization that was paying him. Apex Continental was not a property management company. It was a financial infrastructure for a criminal enterprise, and Sheriff Dale Harkin was its most valuable asset. The collectors who had come into the Iron Piston had not been looking for a debt. They had been looking for this drive. They thought Tanner had sent it to Sloan because Sloan was the person Tanner knew best, the person whose address he would have, the person who was most findable. The eviction notice from Apex Continental was not coincidence. They had known where she lived from the beginning. "Oh, Tanner," she thought. She said it quietly in the empty office to no one. "What did you do?" She sat for a moment longer with the full weight of it. Then she stood up, picked up the drive, and made a decision. She sat back down. She logged into the DOJ tip portal that she had found during a search 2 months ago, during the worst of the debt collector harassment, when she had briefly considered whether she had anything the federal government might want to know. She had bookmarked it out of desperation and then not used it because she had nothing concrete. She had something concrete now. She uploaded everything: the spreadsheet, the documents, the photographs, the financial records, the payment correlations. She included a typed summary of her own name, her connection to Tanner Gould, her employment at the Iron Piston, and the 2 visits from Apex Continental collectors. She submitted the upload at 2:47 in the morning. The confirmation page told her the submission had been received and would be reviewed by a duty officer. She wrote down the submission confirmation number on the inside of her wrist in ballpoint pen, then copied it to the notes application on her phone. She pulled the drive from the computer. She held it in her palm for a moment, this small object that had destroyed at least 2 lives she knew of and was probably not finished yet. She put it in her jacket pocket. She went outside for air. The compound's porch was narrow and faced west toward the open desert. The Joshua trees were black shapes against a sky that held the first suggestions of lightning, still an hour from dawn, but beginning to consider it. The air was cold enough to see her breath. She leaned on the railing and looked at the dark. She heard the voice before she consciously registered that it was a voice. It was low, close to inaudible, coming from the side of the building, from the narrow space between the porch and the utility shed. The tone registered first urgent, suppressed the frequency of a conversation being conducted below normal volume with deliberate intention. She should have gone inside. She knew that in the same moment she knew she was not going to. She moved to the edge of the porch and leaned toward the sound. Dex Harlan was standing in the gap between the building and the shed, phone to his ear, back to the wall. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had on inside. His voice was barely above a murmur, but the night was quiet and the desert carried sound with unusual fidelity. "She cracked it," he said. "An hour ago, maybe 2. She found Harkin." A pause. I know I'm telling you now." Another pause longer. "Rex doesn't know I'm calling. He's asleep." A shorter pause. "Look, I can get the drive, but I want the guarantee in writing. the presidency, and full immunity from any prosecution connected to Apex. A pause. Yes, tonight. Sloane stopped breathing. She backed up one step. The floorboard under her boot registered its opinion of the situation with a sound like a dry branch breaking. Dex's voice stopped instantly. For 2 seconds, nothing. Then Sloane, it was not a question. It was identification flat and immediate, the way you say a name when you have been found out. She ran. She crossed the porch in 3 strides and hit the kitchen door with her shoulder and got inside and shoved the interior bolt home, knowing even as she did it that it was a residential lock on an interior door and would hold for approximately as long as it took Dex to decide he didn't care about the noise. She ran through the kitchen and into the hallway and found Rex's door at the far end and pounded on it with the flat of her hand. Rex! Rex, get up! Dex is on the phone with Harkin. He's going to sell us out. Rex! The kitchen door hit its frame once hard and the bolt gave. She heard Dex in the kitchen. His footsteps were fast and not trying to be quiet anymore. She was still pounding on Rex's door when Dex reached the hallway. She spun around. He was 10 feet from her, a knife in his right hand, his face arranged in an expression she had not seen from him before because he had never needed to stop performing composure. What was underneath it was not rage. It was colder than rage. It was the face of someone making a practical decision. You shouldn't have been out there, he said. His voice was almost gentle. Rex. She didn't take her eyes off Dex. Rex right now. Dex took a step toward her, then he stopped. The sound was specific and unmistakable to anyone who has heard it. A pump-action shotgun cycling a shell into the chamber has a mechanical authority that cuts through most kinds of noise and all kinds of uncertainty. Opal stood in the doorway of the kitchen at the far end of the hallway. She was wearing a flannel nightgown with small blue flowers on it. She was holding a Mossberg 500 with the ease of someone who had been holding that particular shotgun for long enough that it had become an extension of her arms. The barrel was leveled at Dex's chest with the steady, unconflicted aim of a woman who has made all the relevant decisions in advance and is now simply executing them. Put the knife on the floor, Dex, Opal said. Her voice had the particular quietness of absolute certainty. I have been waiting for a reason to do this for 3 years. Please don't make me wait any longer. Dex looked at the shotgun. He looked at Opal's eyes. He looked at the knife in his hand. He thought about it for 1 second, which was 1 second more than it should have taken. Then Rex's door opened. Rex came out wearing boots and a t-shirt, a pistol in his right hand. Brick appeared from the room across the hall, a half-second later, larger and more immediate, a second pistol already up. They took in the hallway, Sloane against the wall, Dex in the middle, Opal at the far end, with the Mossberg, the knife still in Dex's hand. Rex looked at the knife. He looked at Sloane. He looked at Dex. Put it down, Rex said. 3 words. The same 3 words Opal had used, but the texture of them different, carrying the specific weight of someone who has known you for a long time and is now arriving at the end of something. The knife hit the linoleum. Brick was across the hallway before it stopped sliding, Dex face-down, wrists secured behind him with a zip tie from Brick's back pocket, in a motion so practiced it had no wasted components. Rex walked to Sloane. He looked at her with the expression that she had come to associate with him, processing something that required recalibration. You okay? He called Harkin, Sloane said. Her voice was steady. The shaking was internal, a fine trembling along her rib cage that she managed by keeping her breathing even. I heard him from the porch. He found out I'd cracked the drive and he called Harkin. He offered the drive and me in exchange for the club presidency and immunity. She looked at Dex now, being hauled upright by Brick. He sent the coordinates. Dex, how long ago? Dex said nothing. How long ago? Rex asked. His voice had gone quiet in the way that it went quiet when quiet was the most dangerous register available to it. Dex looked at the floor. 20 minutes before she came back inside. The compound's security monitors in the front room activated one after another, the motion sensors catching something at the perimeter. Sloane followed Rex into the front room. On the screen that covered the main gate, headlights appeared. Not one pair. Many. Then more. The organized, methodical advance of vehicles that had been staged at a distance and were now moving in coordination. Rex stood in front of the monitors and looked at them for 3 seconds. His face went through nothing that Sloane could read. Then it settled into the expression she would later understand was what he looked like when he had moved past the phase of the situation where reactions were useful and into the phase where only actions were. He crossed to the wall phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang once. A voice answered mail alert in a way that suggested it had not been asleep. "Doyle," Rex said. "It's Calloway. I need you to activate on my last submission. Compound Mojave off Route 247, 40 acres northwest corner. I have federal material on Harkin in Kern County, and I have incoming." He paused, listening. 90 minutes. He paused again. "We'll be here." He hung up. He turned to Brick. "Get the long guns from the safe. Wake everyone. Wives and kids into the cellar now." He turned to Opal. "Opal, cellar." "I'll go when I'm ready," Opal said, still holding the Mossberg. Rex looked at her for exactly 1 second and decided not to spend more time on it than that. He turned to Sloan. "You stay with me." On the monitor, the front gate's spotlight caught the first of the vehicles clearing the access road. An armored truck. Behind it, 2 tactical vans. Behind those, a line of black SUVs. And moving alongside them in the practice formation of people who have rehearsed this specific approach for this specific location, figures in tactical gear carrying weapons that were not standard law enforcement issue. The lights in the compound went out. The power had been cut from outside. In the sudden dark, Sloan stood still and let her eyes adjust and felt the drive in her jacket pocket, its small, hard weight against her ribs, and thought about the confirmation number copied into her phone. She had done it 2 hours ago. The data was already somewhere it could not be taken back from. Whatever happened in the next 90 minutes, that was already done. She reached into her jacket and closed her fingers around the drive. She stood in the dark kitchen of a compound in the Mojave Desert, the sound of vehicles massing at the perimeter, coming through the walls, and she thought with complete clarity about what was coming and what it would require of her. Then Rex was beside her, a hand briefly on her shoulder. Not comfort exactly, something more functional than comfort. The physical equivalent of, "I know you're here, and I need you to stay sharp." "Ready," he said quietly. "No," she said. The front gate hit the ground with a sound like a building falling. The darkness inside the compound was not total. The moon was still up, and it came through the windows in flat silver panels that cut across the floor at angles and outside the perimeter floodlights of the advancing vehicles threw a hard white glow over the walls that bled through every gap and crack in the cinder block. Sloane's eyes adjusted in the first 30 seconds, and she could see shapes, the outline of the kitchen doorway, the rectangular bulk of the refrigerator. Rex moving toward the front room with a purpose that left no space for hesitation. She followed him. The compound had come awake around them in the way that places come awake when the people inside them have prepared for exactly this. There was no confusion, no scrambling, no wasted motion. The members who lived on the property moved through the dark with the specific efficiency of people who had run this particular drill enough times that muscle memory had taken over from conscious thought. Opal had already disappeared toward the back of the main house, presumably toward the cellar door, though Sloan noticed she still had the Mossberg with her when she went. Brick came back through the hallway with 2 AR-15 slung over one shoulder and a bag of magazines over the other. He handed one rifle to Rex without breaking stride. Rex took it, checked the chamber, seated a magazine, and moved to the window facing the front gate. What had been the front gate? On the perimeter monitor that Brick had switched to battery backup, a small screen now running on a portable power unit, Sloan could see the armored truck had completed its ram and was pulling back to let the tactical vehicles advance through the gap. The gate lay in 2 pieces on the access road. The figures in tactical gear were moving through in a line low and fast, the way people move when they have been told to expect resistance. "How many?" Rex asked. "Main approach maybe 16th, Brick said, studying the monitor. 2 more vehicles holding at the road. Could be another 8-10 in reserve." "Harkin's people?" "Mixed. I see sheriff's department markings on 2 of the vans. The rest is private." Rex looked at the screen for 3 seconds. "Apex brought contractors." "Looks like." "Where's Dex?" "Utility shed, locked." Rex nodded. He turned to Sloan. "Workshop, now, move." They went out the side door of the main house into the cold night air. The desert silence that had been the compound's constant ambient sound was gone, replaced by the controlled noise of the advanced boots on gravel, the low crackle of radio communications, the mechanical sound of weapons being moved from carry position to ready. The floodlights from the vehicles threw moving shadows across the compound's interior yard and turned the Joshua trees beyond the wall into stark black silhouettes. They sprinted across the open ground between the main house and the workshop. 40 feet of exposure. Sloane ran with her head down and her arms pumping and did not think about the open space above her. She heard the sound of the main house door being hit behind them, the tactical team breaching the front entrance, but they were already at the workshop door, and Brick was hauling it open, and they were inside before the first flashbang went off in the house and turned the windows white. The workshop was a metal building 40 feet by 30 with a concrete floor and the accumulated contents of a working motorcycle maintenance operation. 2 bikes in various states of disassembly on center stands, tool chests along both walls, a hydraulic lift, steel shelving holding parts and fluids, and the material evidence of years of mechanical work. Brick rolled the main door shut and threw the heavy bolt, and the sound of it seating in the bracket was the most solid sound Sloane had heard in the last 3 minutes. The walls were steel over a wood frame. It was not a bunker, but it was better than open ground. Brick moved to the small, reinforced window set high in the front wall and looked out. Rook was already there, Sloane realized, sitting in the corner with his back against the tool chest, the sutures she had placed 3 days ago still in his side, a pistol in his hand that he was holding with the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing useful to say. Rex went to the window beside Brick. Count. Front approach is staged at the main house. They're clearing it room by room. Brick paused. They're going to find it empty in about 2 minutes and start spreading out. Exits from this building. Main roll door, the side personnel door, and the roof hatch. Brick looked at the ceiling. Roof hatch opens onto a 6-foot drop to the perimeter wall. From there, it's open desert. That's our last option, Rex said. Not our first. A hail of rounds hit the exterior wall, pinging off the steel siding in a rapid, irregular pattern, not aimed fire suppression testing response. Brick and Rex both went flat against the wall on either side of the window. Sloane dropped behind the hydraulic lift. The rounds did not penetrate. The steel held. Then silence. Then the megaphone. The voice that came through it was amplified and slightly distorted by the equipment, but it carried clearly across the compound yard and through the workshop walls with enough fidelity that there was no mistaking it. Sloane had heard that voice on television. She had heard it on the radio during election cycles. She had seen it in the Kern County Recorder quoted at length on subjects including public safety, community policing, and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. Sheriff Dale Harkin. Rex Calloway. The megaphone gave his name a flat, bureaucratic quality as if it were being read from a list. This property is surrounded by law enforcement and contracted security personnel. There is no exit. We are not here for the club. We are here for one specific item and one specific individual. Surrender Sloane Merritt and the drive she is carrying, and the rest of you ride away tonight. No charges, no pursuit, no further action. You have 2 minutes to respond. The workshop held its silence. Rex looked at Sloane across the dark space. His expression asked her nothing. It told her nothing. It simply acknowledged that she had heard what had been said and that what came next was not yet determined. Brick looked at the monitor. He's got a civilian out front, he said quietly. Male kneeling, hands behind his back. Sloane did not move from behind the hydraulic lift. She did not need to. She already knew. She stood up. She crossed to the window and looked through the narrow, reinforced glass. Tanner Gould was kneeling in the dirt in front of the workshop, caught in the intersection of 2 floodlight beams that rendered him in a clarity that was almost theatrical. He was wearing what had been a decent suit at some point, now torn at the shoulder and dark at the knee where he had been kneeling on unpaved ground. His face was turned toward the workshop with an expression she had learned to read over 3 years of marriage. It was the expression he wore when he was performing vulnerability, when he needed something and had calculated that visible suffering was the most efficient path to getting it. His hands were behind his back, but not, she noticed, secured. They were simply held there. Sarah? His voice came through a smaller speaker, handheld, held up to his mouth by one of Harkin's people. He was using her middle name, the one he had always used when he wanted to reach something underneath the version of her that was on guard. Please. They said if you come out, they'll let me go. I don't want to die out here. Please, just come out. Rex stood beside her at the window. Your call, he said quietly. She looked at Tanner. She looked at the way he was positioned in the light. She looked at where his eyes were directed. Not at the workshop, not at the building where the woman he was asking to come out and surrender herself to armed men was currently standing. His eyes were on Harkin, who was standing 15 feet behind him, radio in one hand and what appeared to be a folded piece of paper in the other. Tanner was not looking for her. He was monitoring Harkin. He was watching to see if his part of the transaction was being performed correctly. She felt something shift in her chest. Not break. Shift. Like a bone that has been set wrong for a long time and is finally being moved back into proper alignment. It hurt the way correction hurts, which is differently from the way damage hurts. Though from the outside, the two can look similar. She stepped back from the window. Rex looked at her. He didn't send me the drive because he was sorry, she said. Her voice was quiet and even. He sent it because he needed a decoy. He needed Apex focused on me while he ran. When they caught him at the border, he traded my name and my location to buy himself more time. She looked at the window, at the light beyond it, at the shape of the man in that light. He's out there right now because Harkin brought him as a prop. Not because they took him, because he came. Rex said nothing. He watched her face. I'm going to go out, Sloan said. But no. Sloan, not to surrender. She looked at Rex directly. I need you to trust me for about 4 minutes. Can you do that? Rex looked at her for a long moment. The kind of moment where a person is not evaluating what you've said, but evaluating who you are, the sum total of every observation they have made since the first time they saw you, weighed against what you are asking them to extend. Brick, Rex said, not taking his eyes off her. Get on the window, clean sight line to the front. Brick moved. Rex looked at Sloan. 4 minutes. She checked her jacket, left pocket the USB drive. Right pocket her phone and the Zippo lighter she had taken from the workbench shelf when she came in, a brass one heavier than average that had been sitting there long enough to accumulate a thin layer of oil and dust. She took the drive from her left pocket and held it in her palm for a moment, looking at it. Then she put it back and took the Zippo from her right pocket. She wrapped the Zippo in the strip of black electrical tape she had pulled from the workbench roll, forming it into a rough rectangular package roughly the same size and weight as the drive. She held it in her left hand. She put the actual drive in her back pocket underneath her jacket where it sat flat against the base of her spine. She had worked 2 years behind a bar where sleight of hand was not a professional skill, but where misdirection was, where the management of attention was the entire job, where you learned instinctively that people see what they are looking for and miss what they are not looking for, and that the gap between those two things is where everything interesting happens. Open the personnel door, she said. Brick looked at Rex. Rex nodded. Brick unbolted the side door. Sloan stepped out into the night. The cold hit her immediately, the deep desert cold that comes in fast once the ground has given up the last of the day's heat. She walked around the front corner of the workshop and into the open ground in front of it, into the edge of the floodlight coverage, and she raised both hands above her head with the deliberate slowness of someone who needs to be seen clearly and does not want to be misread. The radio communications that had been ongoing in the background stopped. Hold fire. Harkin's voice without the megaphone, now direct, sharp. Do not fire. She may have the drive on her. She stopped walking when she was approximately 10 yards from where Tanner was kneeling. She looked at him. Up close in the floodlight, she could see his face in more detail than she had wanted to. The bruising was minor, mostly around his jaw, the kind of bruising you get from being handled roughly rather than from being beaten. His eyes, when they finally found hers, had the quality of a man waiting to see if a transaction was going to clear. Tanner, she said, look at me. He looked at her. Did you send me that drive to warn me? Or did you send it to me because you needed someone for them to chase while you crossed the border? He held her gaze for 2 seconds. 3. She watched the calculation run behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of which answer served him better in this specific moment, with these specific people watching. His shoulders dropped slightly, not remorse, relief at not having to maintain the performance. I needed more time, he said. I'm sorry, Sloan, so I needed them chasing something, and you were findable. I knew they'd go to you first. I thought you'd figure it out and run." He paused. "I didn't think you'd go to a Hell's Angels bar." She nodded slowly. She looked at him for one more moment. This man she had loved, in the way you love things that are not what you think they are. This man who had cost her 2 years of her life and her sister's stability and $34,000 and her nursing degree and the version of herself that had existed before all of that. This man who was kneeling in the dirt in front of her because he had calculated that her life was a useful currency and had spent it without asking. She felt nothing that she needed to act on. That was what told her she was done. She turned to Harkin. Harkin was standing 15 feet behind Tanner, flanked by two men in tactical gear. He was a large man gone slightly to softness in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the physical confidence of someone who had occupied authority for long enough that it had become posture. He was looking at the drive in her raised left hand with an expression that mixed professional control with the specific hunger of a man looking at the thing that either saves him or destroys him. "You want it," Sloane said. She kept her voice flat and carrying. "Here it is." She wound up and threw it, not toward Harkin, not toward the men flanking him. She threw it hard and high and to the right in a long arc toward the darkest section of the compound yard, toward the section beyond the floodlight coverage, where the desert scrub began at the base of the perimeter wall. She put everything she had into the throw, snapping her wrist at the end, sending the brass Zippo wrapped in electrical tape spinning in the distinctive tumbling flight path of a rectangular object at the apex of its arc. Harkin's head turned. She watched it happen, watched the involuntary tracking of his eyes, the lurch of his body weight forward and to the right, the hand coming up in the instinctive reaching gesture of someone whose brain has sent the signal to catch something before the reasoning part of his mind has weighed in on whether catching it is wise or possible or relevant. He stepped forward, his body weight shifted, his right hand came up. Tanner, still kneeling, moved sideways as Harkin stepped past him, displaced by the movement the prop no longer needed for its original purpose. The gap that opened between Tanner and Harkin lasted approximately 1 second. From the workshop window, Brick did not miss. The single shot crossed the yard with the flat authority of a high-caliber rifle, and the result was immediate and irreversible. Harkin dropped. He went down without a staged quality, without the slow descent of dramatic convention. He simply stopped being upright and then was on the ground, and the men flanking him reacted in the fragmented, disoriented way that people react when the anchor point of their operation is suddenly and without warning removed. Sloane dropped to the dirt. She pressed herself flat against the ground and covered her head with her arms. The compound erupted. Rex came out of the workshop at a run, rifle up, moving along the wall of the building to use it as cover, directing fire into the area where the tactical teams had staged. Brick came out of the personnel door on the opposite side. The members of the chapter who had been holding position inside the main house emerged through the windows and the back door, and the compound yard, which had been a killing ground 30 seconds ago, became something more complicated and contested. The private contractors hired by Apex had been paid to complete a job. The job had a principal, and the principal was now on the ground, and the calculation that people make when the risk profile of a situation changes dramatically had shifted entirely against continued engagement. The radio communications that cut through the noise of the firefight had the unmistakable quality of people reassessing a commitment they had made when the terms were different. The first SUV reversed down the access road at 2 minutes past the shot. The second followed it. The tactical vans without the sheriff's direct command structure held for another 90 seconds, and then broke their coordination, dissolving once the organizing authority was gone. The armored truck, which had been staged at the gate, simply turned around. Sloane stood up. The compound yard was smoke and dust and the smell of propellant and the cold desert air moving through it all, clearing it slowly. She looked at where Harkin had fallen. She looked away. Tanner was on his hands and knees in the dirt 10 feet from where he had been kneeling. His suit jacket torn further at the shoulder, his face the color of old concrete. He looked up at her with the expression of a man who has just experienced the full consequence of several years of bad decisions arriving simultaneously and had not been adequately prepared for the physical reality of it. She walked to him. She stopped in front of him. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. This man she had spent 3 years loving and 6 months surviving, and she felt the full weight of what those years had cost her and what that cost had made of her. And she understood in that moment that the two things were not separable, that the Sloane Merritt who was standing in this compound yard had been built out of the wreckage of the version of herself that Tanner Gould had left behind, and that the wreckage had been, in the end, better building material than anything he had ever offered her intact. "Get up," she said. He got up. He stood unsteadily, his hands loose at his sides. "You need to leave California," she said. "Not tomorrow, tonight. You don't contact me. You don't contact Della. You don't use my name for anything with anyone for any reason for the rest of your life. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Sloane, do you understand?" He looked at her for a moment with the beginning of the expression that preceded the slow smile, the one that arrived like it was being given to you, specifically the one she had loved for 2 years and then spent 1 year understanding and 6 months being done with. She watched it start. She watched it stop. She watched him understand that it had nowhere to go. "Yeah," he said, "I understand." Rex appeared at her shoulder. He looked at Tanner with the brief, comprehensive assessment of a man deciding what category something belongs in and landing on irrelevant. He looked at Brick, who was 6 feet away. "Walk him to the road." Brick took Tanner by the collar of his ruined jacket with one hand, the way you take hold of something you are moving from one place to another, and walked him toward the broken gate without ceremony. Tanner went without resistance. Sloane watched him go, the shape of him receding in the floodlight, getting smaller, and then passing through the gap where the gate had been, and disappearing into the dark of the access road. She did not watch him on all the way out. She turned before he was gone. Rex was standing beside her. His rifle was slung. His knuckles were split from something she hadn't seen, the back of his right hand dark with dried blood. He looked at her with the steady, direct attention of a man who has just gone through a serious piece of work alongside someone and is taking the first moment available to verify they came through it intact. "You okay?" he said. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out the drive. She held it out to him. He looked at it. He looked at her. "I uploaded everything 2 hours ago," she said. "OJ tip portal. Submission confirmed at 2:47. Everything on that drive, the financial records, the payment correlations, the photographs of Harkin. It's already on a federal server that Apex and everyone connected to Apex cannot reach." She paused. "The drive itself is evidence, but it's not the only copy anymore. It hasn't been the only copy since before any of this started." Rex was quiet for a moment. He looked at the drive in her extended hand. He reached out and took it, not to secure it, she understood, but because it needed to be somewhere definite, and he was the person who made those decisions here. "The Zippo," he said, from the workbench shelf. He looked at her for another moment. Something moved in his expression that was not quite the thing she had been seeing from him for 2 weeks, the assessment and the calibration and the measuring of usefulness. It was something quieter than that, something that had decided what it thought and did not need to keep deciding. "Doyle's people will be here in 40 minutes, he said. "Doje, when they arrive, you talk to them directly. You give them the submission number. You tell them everything you know from the beginning." He looked at the compound, the broken gate, the lights still burning in the vehicles that had not yet been moved. "This is going to be a long morning." "I know," Sloane said. She sat down on the workshop step. She was tired in a way that was below the physical, a bone-level exhaustion that was the specific kind that follows extended periods of sustained alertness. Her hands had stopped shaking. The arm decks had cut in the hallway had been wrapped in gauze from the first aid kit. It ached dully, but had stopped bleeding an hour ago. The cold air felt clean against her face. She took out her phone. It was 5:14 in the morning. She looked at the screen for a moment, at the photo of Della that was still her wallpaper. Della standing in front of a lake with wet hair and bright eyes and a laugh that was going somewhere out of frame. And she thought about what it meant that she had done all of this, every piece of it, the bar and the drive and the workshop and the shot, and the long, terrible, useful night, and Della was still there, still 62 days into a program that was working, still coming back to herself. She did not call Della. It was too early, and there was too much to say, and none of it was the right kind of thing to deliver at 5 in the morning. She would call on Saturday the way she always did, and she would tell Della that things were sorted, and Della would hear in her voice that something had shifted, and Della would ask about it later when there was time, and Sloane would tell her the truth of it, which was complicated enough that it would take more than one conversation to get through. Opal appeared from the side of the main house carrying a thermos and 2 mugs. She walked across the yard as if the yard were an ordinary yard on an ordinary morning, stepping around the evidence of the last hour with the practical attention of a woman who has seen what yards can look like and has decided that yards get cleaned up and then you move on. She sat down on the workshop step beside Sloan. She poured coffee. She handed Sloan a mug without asking. Sloan took it. They sat together in the cold and drank and looked at the sky to the east, which was beginning its long argument with the dark a deep blue at the horizon lightening incrementally, the stars directly overhead, still sharp and cold, and the ones near the horizon already beginning to lose their edges. "You did good tonight," Opal said. Sloan looked at the horizon. "I was terrified." "Yes," Opal said. "That's what I mean." Rex came and leaned against the workshop wall behind them. Not sitting just present, the way he was often present with the quality of a man who occupies space without requiring it to accommodate him. Cutter came and sat on an overturned crate nearby, his restless hands, finally still turning an empty shell casing over and over in his fingers, the way he turned everything, making a private rhythm out of whatever was available. Brick stood at the corner of the building and watched the access road with the patient, comprehensive attention that seemed to be simply his natural state. Rook came out of the workshop with his arm against his side and sat on the ground near the door. He looked at Sloan. "Good throw," he said. "I played softball for 4 years," Sloan said. Cutter made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was its close neighbor. The sky kept lightening. The stars near the horizon continued their retreat. The desert, which had been holding its cold and its silence against the noise of the last hour, began to reassert itself, the particular deep stillness of open land that does not require human events to justify its existence, coming back in around the edges, reclaiming the compound yard piece by piece. At 6:03, 3 black vehicles came up the access road. They were not tactical vehicles, not armored, not bristling with mounted equipment. They were the kind of vehicles driven by people whose authority is expressed in paperwork rather than firepower. Special Agent Doyle was a compact man in his mid-50s with a precise, unhurried manner and the particular kind of quietness that belongs to people who have been in serious situations long enough that the serious situations have stopped making them loud. He shook Rex's hand. He looked at the compound with the assessing gaze of a man cataloging a scene. He looked at Sloan. "Ms. Merritt," he said, "I understand you have a submission number for us." 247 this morning, Sloan said. She pulled up the confirmation on her phone and showed him. He looked at it, took a photograph of the screen with his own phone, and nodded once. "We've already been in contact with the duty officer who received the submission," Doyle said. "The material is intact and has been flagged for immediate review. We have a team beginning work on the Apex Continental connection this morning." He looked at her steadily. "This is good work." "It was my ex-husband's records," Sloan said. "I just made sure they got somewhere they couldn't be taken back from." "That's usually the hard part," Doyle said. He moved off to confer with Rex and begin the process of documenting the scene, which would take most of the morning and extend into the afternoon, a systematic, methodical work of recording and collecting and interviewing that was in every way the opposite of what the night had been. Sloan answered every question she was asked. She told everything she knew from the beginning: the eviction notice, the job, the collectors, the drive, the discovery of Harkin's connection to Apex, the upload, the night. She told it plainly and in sequence, and without omission. When it was done, she was sitting in a folding chair in the workshop with a second cup of Opal's coffee, and the sun was fully up, throwing long shadows across the compound yard, warming the steel of the workshop wall to something you could put your hand on. 6 weeks later, the iron piston reopened. The new building was larger than the old one. Rex had made structural decisions that were not purely aesthetic. The interior walls had steel reinforcement behind the drywall. The windows were laminated safety glass set in steel frames. The front door was solid oak over a steel core with 3-point locking hardware that was the kind of thing installed in places where doors are expected to face serious disagreement. The bar itself was the same long slab of polished oak salvaged from the fire and refinished, the surface worn smooth in the same patterns as before, which was right, which was the way things that have been used well should look. The neon sign outside was new. It burned steady and red and did not buzz or flicker. Sloane stood behind the bar on the first night back and looked at the room filling up around her and felt the particular quality of that filling, the way the space was being reclaimed by the people who belonged in it, the low-layered conversation, the clink of glass, the smell of cigarettes and leather, and the particular atmosphere of a room that knows what it is and is not pretending to be anything else. She was wearing a leather vest. Rex had given it to her 3 days after the night at the compound, presenting it without ceremony, setting it on the bar in front of her, and going back to his ledger. On the front above the left chest pocket, a patch had been sewn that she had not requested and had not expected. It read in white lettering on black property of no one. She had looked at it for a long moment, and then she had put the vest on. She was not a member. Women did not patch in. That was the rule, and she had not asked anyone to change it, and she did not need it changed. What she was something the rule did not have a category for, and the absence of a category turned out not to matter because the room knew what she was, which was the person behind the bar who had been tested by the kind of tests that cannot be manufactured and had come through them without losing the essential thing, whatever the essential thing was that you needed to still be yourself on the other side. Cutter came in first the way he often did, settling onto the stool nearest the taps with the ease of a man returning to a place that had been his for a long time. He looked at the bar, the walls, the neon. He looked at Sloane. "Looks good," he said. "It does," Sloane agreed. "Same prices." "Same prices," she said. "Don't start." He grinned. The gold tooth that she had learned to read as a reliable indicator of his actual mood, as opposed to his performed mood, caught the bar light. He was in a good mood. The gold tooth said so plainly. Brick came in and took his position at the far end of the bar, without comment, the way gravity takes its position. Rex came in at 7:15, the way he always had, and went to his corner table and opened his ledger. He looked up once and looked at Sloane and gave the slight nod that served in his particular economy of expression the full function of a longer acknowledgement. She nodded back. At 9 in the evening, Sloane's phone vibrated in her pocket. She checked it between customers. A text from a number she did not have saved a Victorville area code. She read it once. She stood still for a moment with the phone in her hand. It was from Portia Della's friend at Clearwater. The text said simply, "She wanted me to tell you she's coming home on Saturday. She said you'd know what that means." Sloane put the phone back in her pocket. She turned back to the bar. There was work to do, the steady, uncomplicated physical work of a room full of people who wanted drinks and would keep wanting them, the work that had been her first foothold in this place and had become over 6 weeks, and everything those 6 weeks had contained the things she was genuinely good at and did not want to stop doing. On Saturday morning, she drove to Victorville. She parked in the small lot outside Clearwater Recovery and sat in the car with the engine off and the windows down, letting the morning air and the particular quality of inland California morning air in late autumn that is cold and clean and smells faintly of sage. The front door opened at 9:15. Della came out carrying a duffel bag over one shoulder and wearing a green jacket that Sloane recognized from 3 years ago before everything, and her hair was longer than it had been in the photograph on Sloane's phone, and her eyes were clear with the specific quality of clarity that is not just the absence of fog, but the presence of something, attention, intention, the look of a person who is inhabiting their life rather than enduring it. She saw Sloane's car and she stopped. She looked at it for a moment, then she walked to it. Sloane got out. They looked at each other across the roof of the Honda. "You look tired," Della said. "I've had a busy 6 weeks," Sloane said. "Yeah." Della looked at her carefully with the assessing attention of a younger sister who has known you her whole life and knows the difference between the versions of your face. "But you look okay." "I am okay," Sloane said. And then because it was Della, because it was Saturday morning and the air smelled like sage, and Della was standing across from her with clear eyes and a duffel bag and 68 days of hard-earned recovery behind her. Actually okay, not pretending. Della put her bag in the back seat. They got in. Sloane started the engine. "Where are we going?" Della asked. Sloane pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road that led north toward the high desert, toward Barstow, toward the rebuilt Iron Piston with its new neon sign and its salvaged oak bar and its room full of people who had decided in their particular way that she was one of theirs. "Home," Sloane said. The road opened out ahead of them, long and straight, and lit by the full morning sun, the desert on either side running flat to the mountains. the sky above it enormous and cloudless, in the precise shade of blue that belongs to California in October, when the air is clean and the light comes in at the angle that makes everything look like it means something. Della turned the radio on. She found something she liked and turned it up slightly and settled back in the seat with the ease of someone who has learned or is learning to let good things be good without waiting for them to stop. Sloane drove. She kept both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road and the sun warm on the left side of her face, and she thought about what Rex had said on the night she survived her first shift at the Iron Piston, when she had asked him why he had defended her against the collectors, why he had put himself between her and men who had come looking for her when he had known her for less than a night. "Nobody walks into my house and threatens my people," he had said. "You work here. You're my people." She had not understood it then, not completely. She had understood the words, but not the weight behind them, not what it meant to be said that by a man who meant it the way Rex Calloway meant everything he said, which was completely and without revision. She understood it now. She had paid for the understanding and the currency that things worth understanding always require, which is not money and not time exactly, but the particular expenditure of yourself that comes from going through something that could have gone the other way and didn't, and coming out on the far side of it, knowing who you are in a way that you did not know before. Sloane Merritt had walked into the Iron Piston looking for a paycheck and a way to keep her sister in a recovery program for 3 more months. She had found those things. She had also found what it cost to protect the people you claimed, what it looked like when a man's word was worth more than a signed contract, what it meant to be in a room full of people whose loyalty was not conditional on your usefulness or your convenience or your compliance. She had found that she was capable of more than she had been allowed to discover. She had found that fear and courage were not opposites, but the same thing in different phases, the same substance responding to different pressures, and that the test of a person was not whether they were afraid, but what they did while they were. She had lost a marriage that had never been real. She had lost an apartment she could not afford. She had lost the version of herself that had been waiting for circumstances to improve before she started being who she actually was. She had found in a cinder block bar on the outskirts of a desert town surrounded by people the world had written off and dismissed and feared the first place in 2 years that had felt like solid ground. The highway ran north. The desert opened around them. The sky held everything. You've used 90% of your session limit.